Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
The title of this lecture is Poverty, can it be eradicated? Here I am concentrating so far. When I am talking about the inclusion of tribal communities, inclusion of marginal castes and depressed castes and oppressed castes and communities, of minorities and so on, I was talking about how social inequalities can be mitigated through economic growth and development. Now, the Government of India has also adopted a strategy of mitigating poverty. It consciously adopted the economic strategy for conscious economic strategy to mitigate poverty ever since, as I had mentioned several times before, ever since the time that Mrs. Indira Gandhi became the won the election on the program of Garibi Hatao. Now, according to the latest figures available, according to World Bank estimates, the United Nations, all the United Nations member countries came together to adopt a set of millennial goals, of which poverty eradication all over the world was a top concern. And at that time, they said that poverty line, that poverty, any household living below $1.25 per day per head is regarded as poor. That in India it comes to about 80 and 100 rupees, maybe less than 100 rupees per day per head. And this was this $1.25 in terms of they have a particular method of talking about this dollar. This is not on the basis of US dollar, but is a measure they use considering the kind of goods that are the prices in the country of essential commodities that are available. There is a parity of the amount of the goods that $1 can buy in our country will be different from the amount of goods that $1 can buy in another country, will be much more than the amount of goods that a dollar can purchase in a developed country. So, on the basis of this, they calculate a parity rate of dollar, and then they have calculated that India, the poor in India will be poor all over the world will be those who get less than $1.25 per day per head. On that basis, the World Bank said that India had 23.6% of the population, it categorized as poor in 2011. Now, subsequently the World Bank in 2015 revised its estimate. According to the latest estimate, the Government of India said that the World Bank said that in 2012 Indian poverty rate had fallen down to 12.4. 12.4. Constituting about 176 million, that is 172 million people are considered to be below the poverty line. So, it looks very impressive. Indian government's attempt to reduce poverty, attack the problem of poverty, it looks very impressive. I suppose we should compliment ourselves for this, but in a qualified manner, because $1.25 is just about the basic minimum. When you talk about poverty, it is poverty of poverty is a multidimensional issue, not just a issue of income. Just barely keeping your body and soul alive is not all about poverty. Poverty is about poverty of poor access to good health care, poor access to schools, all right, poor access to decent standard of living, for instance cooking, for fuel, for water, electricity, access to water, electricity, and so on, and basic assets you require to live in a kind of a dignified manner. And therefore, poverty has several dimensions, and using this approach to poverty is not just about income, it's also about access to education and so on. The there was an Oxford group which developed a multidimensional measure of poverty for India, and it pointed out that 55% of the Indian population actually suffer from multidimensional poverty. I would like to comment on this particular issue subsequently, but before I do that, this of course was a study conducted in 2010, which was much earlier. Maybe this on the basis of multidimensional poverty indices, maybe we have we have also progressed, but I think there is not substantial evidence that we have progressed so much that poverty has been eradicated, especially in the context of multidimensional poverty. That's because I'll have to talk about this. That's because of the nature of public services that are available in our country. I'll talk about it very quickly, very soon. But before I go on to that, I want to mention here that in the Manmohan Singh government had set up a national commission on enterprises in the unorganized sector, and that national commission did considerable extensive work on the extent and the problems that the unorganized sector enterprises face, and came to the conclusion, in his assessment, it came to the conclusion that in India, this is around 2009 or so, 2009, in India, according to their estimates, poverty might have come down like this, but the vulnerability of the population is quite severe. That means, he says, according to this report, nearly 80%, that's actually 78% of the population of the country, it declares as vulnerable, partly due to the due to the fact that there are poverty is a multidimensional aspect. I'll say what it means, what they mean by vulnerability. Vulnerability is that you lift yourself out of the poverty line. All right, the government gives you a pair of bullocks, all right, or a buffalo to rear, all right, and then you use the buffalo, you feed it, and then it yields milk, and then it also yields another offspring, and then you have not one buffalo, two buffaloes, and you progress and you lift yourself. Your income goes above whatever $1.25 or what have you. But then if some unusual expenditure occurs in your family, say there is an important religious festival you have to perform, or say that you have a health casualty in the family, you have to show your spouse to a doctor or so on, the expenses that are involved will be so huge that the family, the household which had risen above the poverty line earlier slips back into poverty, especially if the main earner of the household, if he or she falls ill, then what happens is that he has to take leave, he can't work. If he is a casual laborer, he can't go out and work, and because of that his family has to starve, and his capacity to earn may be debilitated. If he has some asthma, or if he catches some kind of an occupational disease, all right, then his capacity to do hard work diminishes, and he will slip back into below the poverty line. This can happen even to an industrial worker who is working in the informal sector. If he takes leave for or a longish period, he may be sacked, and somebody else may replace him, and he may find it difficult to get back into a job for quite some time. So as a result, what happens is that the household which had moved up above the poverty line may slip back. It's a very steep climb beyond the poverty level, so it may slip back. So what this commission, National Commission on Enterprises in the unorganized sector, says is that we should really be considering the proportion of population which is vulnerable, which is considerable. All right. In spite of our development efforts, if the nearly 80% of the population is in this position, then what kind of inclusive development, what kind of equitable development that has taken place? That's the question that they ask. In fact, the kind of debate that has gone on the elimination, on the reduction, amelioration of poverty, has now encouraged governments and political parties to introduce numerous welfare measures. For instance, not only one of the measures, one of the laws that the UPA government brought in 2003 was the National Food Security Act of 2013, which guaranteed subsidized food for nearly 2/3 of India's population. It made it mandatory that it conferred entitlements on the poor to demand to get food at low rates, at highly subsidized rates. All right, as 5 kilos of rice is given per person per month at 3 rupees per kilo, or for 5 kilos of wheat at 2 rupees per kilo, or 5 kilos of coarse grain at 1 rupee per kilo. This was made available. The government had to make provisions to sell this. So, and then it also made provisions that midday meal school program and integrated child program services and special services for pregnant and lactating mothers. All these things were food, nutritious food for them. All these things are provided by this Food Security Act. And in many countries, in Tamil Nadu, the government also started the previous government regime. The previous regime, they started opening canteens where the poor can get nutritious food at highly subsidized rates. This example is now followed by the Karnataka government, which also gives 30 kilos of food at free of cost, and also it has also introduced these canteens where subsidized food is available for everyone. So these are the measures that have been taken to combat poverty. Of course, recently the government has announced that they will have a massive health insurance program covering everyone, universal health insurance program, and in some states in the country they have already introduced health insurance programs covering large sections of the population, especially the poor and the peasants and the farmers and so on. So all these measures have been enacted. Now the latest idea is that you should have universal, that is the pet idea of the economic advisor of the current economic advisor of the country, that is to institute the system of universal basic income. That is, everyone, irrespective of what he is earning or what he is capable of earning, is given a basic income that ensures that she or he can live, can have a living, decent living, can have decent living with that income. This idea of universal basic income has been introduced in one of the, I think it's in Finland, I think, I'm not sure, or in one of the European countries has already been introduced, where this is because now the governments are finding it, now we are in the era of jobless growth. And many of the old jobs, old occupations and jobs of the old employment opportunities are shrinking. So in this era of jobless growth, how do you, when people don't have jobs, how do you expect them to survive? So these governments are thinking of introducing universal basic income to combat poverty. Now I don't know whether this will actually come through, but even if it comes through, I think poverty is a more complex subject than these economists make it out to be. Poverty is multidimensional, as that Oxford Institute has, which developed this multidimensional index points out. But more than that, poverty is also a relational issue of relationships, all right, and issue of culture and perceptions, all right. these are these are all the social dimensions of poverty. You see, I'll start with a very small example. I have poor people can come from any caste. I have interviewed some people, have done intensive interviews of some people who were actually some policy makers in Karnataka who were in dire poverty conditions, but they have somehow managed to overcome that their deprivations to occupy highest positions in the government and so on, and they've really succeeded in a big way. And these biographies of the poor people who have been upwardly mobile and who have shaken off the grip of poverty indicates to me that many of those who did belonged to the upper castes, to the castes which were ritually superior, or which were which considered themselves superior, right? And they had that's why culture comes in. They had what shall I say, their parents had the foresight to realize that education is the best route, best way out of poverty. And these stories show how these boys and girls were sent to nearby towns, to their relatives' places, to live there and to get educated, and how through their networks of caste networks, kinship networks, and even networks of friendship. Here, class does come into play, not just caste. They were able to overcome the handicaps of poverty and move up the social ladder. There were institutions, middle class institutions where many of these youngsters who came to study in colleges or schools, they had a rotational. They used to, on a rotational basis, in a week, they used to visit different households for lunch or dinner and so on, so that the community also shared the costs of took the community, the nearby community, neighboring community also participated in their upward social mobility. This was possible for those castes which were regarded as ritually pure castes, or not even higher caste generally. But caste system is so vicious that it will not while you may entertain a member of another caste who is another clean caste to your house to share your food with him, you don't open your doors to Dalits, all right? So where will the Dalits go? Where will the Dalit poor go? So what I'm trying to say is the network of course, I mean in Karnataka where I come from, there were these religious institutions which also built hostels. There were rich people who built hostels for children of their particular caste or community to come and to study in urban areas, in schools and colleges and so on. So this network, supportive network, was available for these people to move up the ladder. Whereas take for instance the case of what will happen to Dalits. Do they have such network of institutions to support them? Social institutions, they did not possess because of a variety of factors. all right. And not only that, these also, so what I am trying to say is that if you look at caste as a resource network, all right, it works wonders for the higher castes. In my study of entrepreneurs in Faridabad, I realized that some of the entrepreneurs can never fail, because they had, even if they fail, they can recover and then become successful, because they can bring into operation their caste and kinship networks to get a big loan from a nationalized bank to overcome their troubles and start all over again. This used to happen. And of course, the bigger entrepreneurs, many of them belong to business families. Even if they fail once, they can always succeed the next time. So they had this cushion, what the social cushions that were available to them, whereas some of the castes down below did not have these networks and institutions. How will they, they will find it much more difficult to climb up the social ladder. And then, of course, now we say that the reservations policy has been enacted, and special programs for building hostels and then training facilities for children of the Dalits and oppressed castes have been built. The government has done has taken initiative in several areas. But then the point is that even then problems remain. How? It's a cultural problem. If, for instance, through reservations, if somebody goes to a medical college or an engineering college, all right, and if he belongs to a low caste or a remote tribe, what happens is that he will feel culturally alienated. He will have psychological problems, and then he will not have the supportive structure of friends who shared his background. You see, if you want to know why the background is important, is you just read Obama's autobiography. That is American President Obama's autobiography. He says his autobiography shows in his school days how he decided to identify himself with the blacks, because of course he was of mixed parentage, but he was more black looking than Anglo-Saxon. Therefore, he started identifying himself with the blacks, not only for ideological reasons, but that culture encourages you, that culture of friendship, that network of friendship that you have encourages you, supports you when you're, when you're feeling, when you're finding it difficult to cope with the stresses of the competitive exams and so on. So, what's important also is the ecology, social and cultural ecology of the institutions into which, especially educational institutions. What is important is that, of course, these those from the oppressed castes, don't have this support. The government has given them these facilities of reservations and all that. And when they enter, but reservations do not solve the problem, but create new problems. How does it create new problems? When they enter educational higher level education institutions where competition is severe, quite often they find the environment of those institutions quite intimidating, because and then they find that they don't have a support structure of friends and well-wishers who can sort of lift them up, who can encourage them when they are feeling out of sorts, all right, who can sort of give them advice, counsel them on what to do. If you are finding certain subjects difficult, why don't you take up other subjects, or why don't you, the options that you have, they can explore other options for them and offer advice and all that. This is what networks do. So lacking such networks and lacking such support systems, these young men and women feel alienated. That's exactly what happened with when Mr. Vemula of Hyderabad University committed suicide. This was what he left behind. He said that he did not have the support structure. There was no support structure to prevent this young man from committing suicide. That that there also ought to be a particular kind of ecology, that was missing. How do you create that ecology? How do you create that cultural ecology? These are all very big questions. That and also there's a very serious problem. Another serious problem, because poverty is multidimensional. I said poverty also comes in different forms. A woman who is this is recognized by this was recognized by the Government of India, which conducted a census to not only determine to not only record castes, enumerate castes in the country. This was in 2011. It also tried to identify, draw a poverty line. Who are poor? It had to judge. And in the course of these investigations, the questionnaire that designed wanted to explore different types of poverty. For instance, it did not go into the details that into all the details that I am mentioning. It went into some. For instance, it found that a female-headed household, if it is Dalit, if it's a Dalit woman who is the head of the household, all right, if she has no land or other assets, no earning member, no able-bodied earner, above the age of 16, years, she is regarded as the most vulnerable, right? Definitely she should be included under the poverty line, right? But now what happens when it comes to a displaced tribal who is, let us say, a victim of a nausea of the Narmada dam in the project? He does not have language. He has language problems. He is located in an area where his language is not spoken. All right. He has to bring up his family, and the kind of problems that he faces in a new setting is quite different. This woman may be comfortable in her village where she is where she might have even found found people who employ her, who give her a living wage. All right. What about a nausea or a migrant who has come into a particular village, all right, of a particularly low caste? And even among the Dalits, there are some Dalit communities which are which have now built up a tradition of education, of giving emphasis on education in the household, in the family. But there are other community, and they have, have got the benefits of reservations. But there are others who are much more deprived, who are in more, what shall I say, particularly occupations which are considered very menial occupations. What about those people, all right, who may also be regarded as Dalits, but who may also be considered as scheduled castes, but their cultural capital may be less than the cultural capital of the Dalit community, which is more dominant, which has had experience of somewhat some upward mobility. So it varies from caste to caste, even among the scheduled castes, even among the OBCs, because some of the OBCs may be used to, some members of the OBC may be used to doing petty trade, but that petty trade may, or for instance a Muslim boy who is going to garage, who has learned his craft in garage, and when he, the kind of deprivation he faces is, and supposing if he has an accident, this is, I've seen gory incidents of landless laborers, one of the getting their his hand chopped off, all right, and he still didn't want to cry because he didn't want to be sacked from the job. Anyway, I'll very soon be talking about the informal sector. I'll come to that very soon. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there are such, what shall I say, cultural variations surrounding the poor households. There are such varieties of, cultural deprivations that they face, that it is, unless you attend to the social and cultural ecology, unless you mend the cultural ecology, it will be very difficult to ensure that there is inclusion. Maybe you can give them a basic income, but what they do with the basic income is a very big problem. You see, for that is why, for instance, the women actually, generally, especially poor women, especially scheduled caste women, scheduled tribe women, they are all against, they are all for the policy of prohibition, because the culture of the the culture of poverty is such that if drinks are available, accessible, if their husbands have access to alcohol, then the amount they bring home for basic necessities shrinks enormously. So these are issues that we have to, these are cultural issues that we have to face up in order to ensure that poverty is reduced, is let alone be abolished. Because every time you dole out money or you dole out food, it does not attend to the cultural issues that are the cultural aspects of poverty that need to be tackled. That's one. And then second, perceptions are also important. You see, perceptions, we talked about vulnerabilities. Now, especially today, in this, in this age, in this global age, there is also the insecurity has become widespread. The sense of insecurity has become, spreads right across the spectrum of social strata. Why? Because there is no guarantee in the private sector, because some of the private sector enterprises may be succeeding today, but there is no guarantee that enterprise will not become obsolescent because of technological advances. All right, that there is no guarantee that it will survive in 2 years hence. So, there is always this anxiety amongst the people, even the big engineers, big executives who work in those factories may suffer the pangs of insecurity, job insecurity. They may be thrown out any time because of market, because market, there are wild market fluctuations, or because of technological advances, the task that they were involved in may no longer be valued. Many of the computer programmers who were this is one of the problems that the computer programmers face, that many of the firms prefer younger computer programmers than to the older programmers. They would like to, if the older programmers, their output is productivity is peaking, and they are not if they are found if it's found that they are not of much value to the company, they will be easily sacked in preference to a younger programmer, because he will be knowing the latest knowledge of, he will be having knowledge of latest programs, and he will be more supple in grasping new ideas, and he will be more he will also be more competitive and productive. Therefore, even those who are in permanent, who are in relatively stable positions up in the hierarchy in a company, they have this issue of insecurity, and add to that insecurity the problems that these for instance, one of the reason why I am saying this is that I am trying to understand why is it that castes that have benefited from development programs, like for instance the Patidars, the Patels of Gujarat, or the Marathas, on the whole they are dominant castes. They have wielded power, they have enjoyed the perquisites of power, they have had there are many families which have done exceedingly well, which are exceedingly wealthy, and they have become very notable industrialists and all that. But in spite of that, why are they asking for reservation? My point is, there are for two reasons. One is that while some of them have climbed up, it's not as if the entire community has been able to reap the benefits of expanding economic opportunities. And also they find that jobs in the government, government has become very powerful, which are the jobs in the government are close to them, because there are reservation quotas. So and in addition to that, their expectations of their standard of life, their cultural standards, their culture makes them accept certain style of life which may be considered as luxurious for their poorer cousins. So, as a combination of all these factors, this is anxiety sets in, the perceptions. So, what happens is they are also asking for reservation quotas. The point that I am trying to make is that poverty, all right, the attempts to overcome poverty should also, the strategies should also include cultural and social strategies, and how do you create that the social ecology to ensure that poverty is reduced is a very big sociological question that sociologists have answered. Sociologists have to answer, and that means you have to create institutions that are maybe caste neutral in a real sense. That is that maybe institutions which which sort of internalize the idea of equality, all right, what the idea of one man, one value that Dr. Ambedkar said, that to come up for that to happen, I think we should move towards a casteless society, which is not really on the cards. This is not really likely to happen in the near future. Now, with the remaining time that is available to me, I will also link up this poverty issue with the economic structure. I think in order to have caste-free institutions, in order to have social milieus in which these caste disabilities do not function, I think there are 2 or 3 paths we can explore. One is that that's the most as I think it's very important, that is that I think we need to change our strategy of promoting equality. Why do I say that we should change our strategy of promoting equality? It is because this method of providing reservations has that it was necessary at one stage. Now it is producing several counterproductive trends. All right. First, one of the first things that's happening is that this reservation policy, gives affects the psyche, of people in one way. First of all, it heightens caste. The approach that we have followed so far heightens caste and community consciousness, whether it is you are Muslim or Hindu or whether you are a tribal community, all these identities become very important. So we entered the era of identity politics. We have entered the era. This has been there for a long time, but this has become identity politics has become more intense. And in this era of identity politics, what really, I'm afraid, it is likely to act as a constraint on growth, because if you look at people used to say that you should they used to be against the criterion of merit, right, in selecting people for jobs, in admitting students to various college educational institutions, higher educational institutions, and so on, with some merit. That idea that merit is iniquitous and merit is culturally loaded is an accept. I buy that idea. I accept that idea. But now the issue is that it does not promote a sense of team spirit that is required for collective task of the government or public, or in other public institutions. Even in private enterprise, it may affect productivity of private enterprises. If your your caste consciousness is high, and if there are what shall I say, clusters of castes which sort of hive off, they will have their own agenda, which may ultimately subvert the agenda of the private enterprise that has come into existence in the first place. That's one. The team spirit may be weakened. And then second, what's important is that these kind of caste based reservations also inculcates a sense of what shall I say, a sense of dissatisfaction, both among those who don't receive the benefits of reservation, as well as amongst those who do that. I mentioned already how the Patidars, why the Patidars now want reservations. At the same time, those who have received the benefit of reservation, they somehow feel that that the benefit that they have got is is in some sense a kind of this thing. They say that they say it is compensatory reservation, but still they feel that their quality, their worth as capable persons who can execute certain tasks, who have certain professional skills, those qualities are not being appreciated. This will give them a sense of dissatisfaction too. So there is a sense of as a consequence, what happens is that there is in terms of morale of institutions, when they have public institutions, it definitely sort of depresses, the morale is such that it depresses performance all round. And therefore, I think that in order to, and it's very important that you ensure, one of the main aims of reservation was that the talents available among the depressed and oppressed communities are also drawn in to the process of national development. All right. So this being the case, that you have to inculcate the team spirit, the collective spirit that is needed for these public institutions to make an effort at nation building, to excel in order to advance the cause of the nation. That kind of we are talking about nationalism. This kind of team spirit at every level is necessary. This nationalism should be articulated in the form of team spirit at every level. Unfortunately, unless there is unless we now start pursuing excellence and rewarding people on the basis of excellence too. All right, I am afraid that the hidden talents, the potentials of that obtain amongst the oppressed castes and communities cannot be fully tapped. And for this, in order to to highlight my point, all that I want to mention to you is about look at the Indian cricket team. That I know, I am aware that this is not a very good example of, after all, it is in the area of sports, all right. In the area of sports and games, in some way it is entertainment, but yet look at the achievements of the Indian cricket team as competition has increased, intensified. Indian cricket team has become the best in the world, and it has in the stars of the Indian cricket team are no longer the upper caste urban urban upper caste, young men. It's a united team consisting of people from both urban areas and the smaller towns. It consists of people belonging to the minority communities, the OBCs and the upper caste. So, there is a mingling of all these representatives of all these castes and communities, as a result of which there is that keen sense of competition, and this keen sense of competition drives them to to perfect their their skills, whether it's in batting or bowling or fielding. And of course, they are rewarded sumptuously for the display of their talents or their excellence. And because of that, Indian cricket team, in fact, as Rajdeep Sardesai mentions, it's an example of democracy, Indian democracy at work. All right, is one of the best examples of Indian democracy at work. And I think more and more, if such institutions which are oriented towards excellence are created, then I think it is possible to rectify this issue of social ecology of equality. And I must say, I must add here that the pursuit of excellence is not contrary to the pursuit of equality. After all, the Dalit student Vemula, who said that this is one of the reasons why there is no cultural capital. The Dalit student Vemula, in his suicide note, he had mentioned that nobody recognizes me as stardust. I know I am stardust, he says. So that means that there was that sense of not being appreciated for his qualities. So what I am emphasizing is that pursuit of excellence is also the pursuit of equality, and we should not see them as contradicting each other. And it is time now that we change the strategy of this social strategy of social engineering strategy that we have adopted, in order to promote equality. I think gradually there should be institutions and awards given to Dalit students who do well. In fact, if Dalits are recognized for their excellence, they will also build the networks of Dalits who will be supportive to the younger generation of Dalits. Incidentally, this is what now in spite of all the social obstacles, handicaps, many Dalits have made it big. Even in the field of business, there is now the Dalit Chamber of Commerce, and the Dalit Chamber of Commerce, many of the people who are interviewed, they are not in favor of reservations. They say that we can take them on. We have the potential to take on competition. I think this should be the spirit that should be encouraged, and we should hold up the members of the Dalit Chambers of Commerce, the Dalit entrepreneurs who have made it very big, including a Dalit woman who made it big, as our national idols. So it is time for us to revise our strategy of economic growth with equality.